Hello, and welcome to another episode of Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah.
And I like to start off with some positive notes at the beginning. I like to think our whole podcast is positive.
I think that should be we like to start off, not just you.
That's true. I was just laying claim to the idea because, you know.
It was, I will grant you that it was your idea initially. But
I gotta say, Heloise rubbed off on me, and I've been a little bit, I got that pride going. Taking credit for everything with various degrees of sincerity.
Bringing in that podcast book talk in the intro.
I know. It's like we talk about books or something.
Perish the thought.
I was wondering if it's even accurate to say that we start the podcast with a ray of sunshine, because isn't the whole episode wonderful? I like to think so.
I mean, I think it depends on how much spanking content we have.
Well, which direction does that go?
Up to the listener.
Okay. Well, let's start with a not necessarily book-related positive thing. Sarah, what's something great that happened this week?
I saw an old friend from college whom I haven't seen in literally years. We went and got coffee at this really cute little coffee shop in Berkeley. So that was nice.
Venturing out into public and everything. Incredible.
I know. I actually left the house. Who even am I?
Well, my good thing does not involve leaving the house. I rearranged some furniture today. I've sort of moved back into my office, but that's not the good thing. The good thing is that moving furniture always gives our cats some kind of weird gremlin energy. I don't know what it is, but just any kind of rearrangement of the house just gives them such zoomies all day, running in and out of the rooms, exploring the same desk that I have had for their entire lives, but suddenly it's in a different place, and so it's very exciting. And so I've gotten to hear them gallop throughout the house all day, and it's great.
If it's in a different place, that means it's a new piece of furniture.
Yeah, that's what it feels like.
They've never seen this desk before in their entire lives.
It's revolutionary.
Exactly.
Actually, Bard keeps peeking his head into the podcast recording, which is very nice.
It's very cute.
Anyway, I have a very nice desk set up now instead of like hunched over on the couch, which is more comfortable, but not as useful.
This is true.
Yeah. Anyway, as far as our actual episode tonight goes, Sarah, what are you drinking tonight?
I made myself a whiskey sour. A lot of whiskey sour. A very strong whiskey sour.
So we better get this recording done fast, otherwise it's going to go downhill.
Basically.
All right.
And what are you drinking tonight, Lily?
It's clearly just a whiskey day, because I am having a hot toddy.
We were clearly on the same wavelength.
It's been raining up here, and so
I'm jealous.
I needed it.
I'm so jealous.
Have you read anything good lately?
I did. I read The Wisteria Society of Lady Scoundrels by India Holton.
You were telling me about that. It sounds so good.
And it is so good. It's a romance novel, which I know I'm on the record as saying I don't much care for romance novels. But this one, the romance was secondary enough to the plot that it totally worked for me. And the plot is basically like, what if some highbrow Victorian ladies learned how to make their houses fly? And then they went around as pirates, pirating their houses, flying their houses, and attacking each other and having tea with each other and generally being scoundrels. And it is so good, so funny. The sequel comes out at some point next year, and I adored it. Like, this is probably one of my favorite books that I've read this year.
That sounds great.
It was amazing. Yeah, it was amazing. Have you read anything? I know that you're not going to be able to top The Wisteria Society, but
no, and very different content. I've been trying to look up some of the historical mythology surrounding golems. I'm mostly familiar with the concept as it is seen in, Dungeons and Dragons and popular culture fantasy, but I know that they are of Jewish origins, and so I wanted to read a little bit more about where they actually came from and sort of the original stories around them. I found apparently there's a book published by the Jewish Museum in Berlin, but only some of it has been translated. So I can't actually buy the book, but they have the translated segments posted on their website. So I've been going through that.
Well, that sounds interesting. Is there any particular reason for your interest in golems?
Funny you should ask. Yes, I am working on a book that has leans very heavily on magically constructed people that I refer to as golems. And I've been working on it for a couple of years. And I was like, I should make sure I'm not doing anything really stupid.
That's probably a good point. There is an episode of Supernatural that deals with golems that is worth watching.
I'm sure it's worth watching. I suspect it is not any closer to the original mythology than.
I mean, how accurate it is, I couldn't say, but they do make a point of like incorporating Jewish mythology into it.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So like they clearly did at least some research.
That's good. And that is what I hope people say about my book someday. Well, we read a couple of books for this evening, or whatever time of day it is, through the power of technology.
For this episode.
There you go. The first book we read was The Part About the Dragon Was Mostly True by Sean Gibson. This was a fun book.
It was a fun book. It got on the calendar because I had seen a review online somewhere and thought, oh, this sounds right up my alley. And so I purchased it. And then that day, Sean was running a competition on Twitter for a signed copy, and I entered, and I happened to win. And then I had 2 copies, and I was like, well, I don't know what to do with the second copy. I'll send it to Lilly.
And I do appreciate that. We gotta start working books we already own onto the schedule somehow. Give our wallets a break.
I mean, we did that with this.
That's true. That was great. It was brilliant. Very good planning on your part.
Indeed.
I will say it did take me a couple chapters to really get into this book, mostly because I haven't read anything by Gibson before. And so he spends a lot of time setting up fantasy tropes and Dungeons and Dragon tropes, which I am very familiar with and love. But he spent enough time setting them up that I, as a reader, was wondering, where are you going with this? I need more than just, the Randy half-elf bard. But eventually he does start playing with the tropes and subverting expectations in a way that was super fun. I didn't know what to expect, and I didn't know if we were going to get to that point, and I'm very glad that we did.
We do get there. And one of the things that I really enjoy about this book actually is how it subverts like some of the racial prejudices you see in D&D, like the elves versus orcs thing. It goes into how elves are just really good at propaganda, essentially.
Yeah.
And they're all the bards, so they're the only point of view that you hear. There's a rock giant who spends most of the story speaking very, very slowly, but then it turns out that he's like really good at math and knows a lot. He's really good at sewing, and so that was fun. A fun sort of subversion.
I mean, like I said, once we got to, definitely by the time we got to the orcs, I was so happy. That part was one of my favorites. But it starts earlier, and I eventually caught on that the narrative style and the narrator herself was
incredibly unreliable.
Well, yes. It wasn't just an unreliable narrator. It was Gibson using that unreliable narrator to make jokes at her expense that the character didn't necessarily realize she was making, which,
yes,
I mean, that was just really well handled. It was some excellent prose in that sense. I mean, in every sense, you know what I mean. I'm talking about that in particular.
I do know what you mean. I really enjoyed. So this story is set up as Heloise talking about this adventure that she has been recounting as like a bardic tale everywhere. And you get the bardic tale, but then in between you also get her story of what actually happened.
But still from her perspective, which, as we said,
yes,
is very
still
biased.
From her perspective. So it's all of it is biased, but I really enjoyed that framing story and how you see what like the expectation is. It's it's like that expectation versus reality thing. Like you expect this really heroic tale, and what you get is not quite that.
A lot of poop jokes, as you say.
A lot of poop jokes, except when it's Heloise doing it, because she, of course, is incredibly heroic and beautiful.
And everyone's always enchanted by her beauty, except when they're not, but she's still pretty sure that they are. Confession time. In our long-running D&D campaign, it's been going on, well, there have been a couple hiatuses, one of which being COVID, but we started it 6 years ago. And we have taken our characters from level 1 to level 20, which I don't know if people need context, but 20 is very high.
Yeah, that would explain why it's taken you 6 years.
Yeah. Well, like I said, there's been some long chunks of hiatus. We haven't been playing. But for a while, we were doing twice a week for this campaign. It was fun. I do play a half-elf bard. It's me. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. I love Laurelyn. She and Heloise would get along very well. But it's that stereotype. And there were a lot of moments in this book where I not only recognized the stereotype, but recognized it in myself. and I felt it was a loving way. It wasn't rude.
Yeah, none of it feels like mean or malicious. It's like Sean has a lot of love and respect for D&D and enjoys it and is just poking fun at some of the tropes that you see in games.
It's also not just that surface level, everyone jokes about the Randy Bard. Like, that's a meme at this point. But there's also some scenes where the different characters are trying to overcome some sort of conflict, and they're getting in each other's way, and one of them does an action that messes up what the other character was planning on doing. I did just say action. I'm sorry. I'm not going to use D&D logo the entire time.
It would be kind of appropriate if you did, though.
I was chronicling. My husband's our DM, the Dungeon Master, so I was chronicling to him all of the different D&D phrases as I came across them. He agrees that orcs and goblins get a bad rap. We actually are on the goblin side in our campaign. Anyway, this isn't Lilly talks about her D&D campaign for an hour, but it's hard not like this book brought up all of those fond memories for me.
Mm-hmm. And I also think that, I mean, both you and I are D&D players, but I feel like, so I don't actually play a lot of what I would call name brand D&D.
Mm-hmm.
And this book was still really accessible to me as someone who doesn't play a lot. Like you don't actually need to be that familiar with any of the terms or anything like that, because it's worked in really well.
Yeah, everything is in context, right?
Mm-hmm.
So even though I giggle when I can tell that Whiska is describing spell slots, that doesn't mean you have to know what a spell slot is to interact with the story.
Mm-hmm.
Also, can we talk about Whiska? Because I love her.
Whiska was fantastic.
She was a little rat person, and she was the wizard, and she was great.
The foul-mouthed wizard who insulted everyone constantly.
But she liked it when people insulted her back, and I think that was really important for her as a character. She wasn't just mean, that was just how she communicated, and she wanted people to participate. That's such a different vibe from, I'm just going to be rude to everyone. Meh.
Yeah. No, I agree with you entirely there.
You mentioned the sort of narrative structure of this book with the bardic myth versus slightly more accurate retelling of events. And that reminded me quite a bit of Gigantic by Ashley Stokes, which we read pretty recently. It's not the same book at all.
No, they're very different books.
They're very different books.
I see what you mean about there being kind of a similar framing structure, because in Gigantic you get the straight-laced character's perspective on events, and then you get the how would you call it?
It's about people hunting for Bigfoot. And you have one person who very rigorously abides by, like, the rules of science, and then someone reacting to that who truly believes Bigfoot is real and reads into things in a very different way and has a very different impression of events. And so that is different from this because we're getting two different characters retellings. Whereas for this book, the part about the dragon was mostly true. We're getting one character telling us two different versions of this story for different purposes, which is also such a comment on just storytelling in general. Gibson, you madman. My favorite line, maybe not necessarily my favorite line, a line I loved that I did pull out as my note, the thesis of this book. I don't just break hearts, people. I break fourth walls.
There were a lot of really good quotable lines in this book. Also bad puns.
There were a lot of puns.
There were a lot of puns. And as a deep lover of puns, I appreciated it.
I think we'll probably get more into this conversation when we start talking about the other book we read for today, Eric by Terry Pratchett. But this was a very good pairing. We're not usually this good at pairing up books.
We are not, but there's something almost Pratchett-like about the part about the dragon was mostly true. I mean, you get maybe a little blunter with some of the bathroom humor in this.
Explicit.
And it's certainly
a little more explicit.
A little more explicit. And it's certainly more D&D focused than a lot of Pratchett is. But it had that same kind of humor and that same kind of vibe.
Oh, the tone, absolutely.
Yeah.
Gibson didn't use footnotes the way that Pratchett does, but he will have parentheses inside parentheses on a page. And it definitely feels like that nested footnote where Pratchett is just giving you world details.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just following along because that's a fun detail. Does it really have anything to do with the story? No, but I want to know about round kebabs. Shishka rounds? I don't remember what they were, but I read them in the part about the dragon was mostly true, and it was great.
Yeah. There's a
Shishka rounds.
Shishka rounds.
Babka shish rounds. I don't know.
Something. There's a lot of really nice world building that goes on in these parentheses.
And again, it throws a lot of lore at you, but also contextualizes it at the same time, which, because a lot of the creatures are, I assume, fabricated, like crackle roaches and things. There's no way that we would know what that was going into it.
Mm-hmm.
But because Heloise is telling us this story, she's also explaining what these things are. And that is why I did not hate the first-person narrative perspective in this book.
I was wondering if we would talk about that because you're on record in multiple places about not enjoying first person generally.
No one's going to believe me because we keep reading good ones.
The horror.
I know, but I promise I'm much harder on first person narration than I am on third person. But this book, first of all, has the unreliable narrator, which is super fun. But also one of the problems I tend to have with first person narration is that the voice has to be there. If I'm supposed to believe that this is someone telling me a story, or if I'm supposed to believe this is someone's mental commentary, their word choices and their phrasing has to match that. And so many times a book will be in quote unquote first person, but it's explaining events the way someone farther away would be explaining them. Does this make sense? Am I making sense?
I mean, that makes sense to me. How much that will make sense to listeners who have not drunk half a glass of whiskey sour, I can't guarantee.
It's like someone describing themselves, right? A third person narrator might describe a character in a certain way, whatever. But an actual person would never use that same phrasing to describe themselves.
Mm-hmm.
That's one where I get really nitpicky a lot of times.
Mm-hmm.
But in books like the part about the dragon was mostly true, I absolutely believe Heloise would describe herself the way she does in the whole book, because that's the whole point. Do we want to end our non-spoiler section with a quote before we hit why you should read this book?
Yes, I think we should do that. I wanted to say something clever, even flippant, but Nurk was making too many rational points I couldn't refute or ignore. Deflecting guilt with insults is a time-honored Heloisian tradition, but it felt suddenly trite, which was really annoying. I hate conversations that make me want to be a better person.
Me too, Heloise. Me too. Hey, this is not really relevant, but I was extremely confused. It comes up at the end of the book. I don't think this is a spoiler, though. There's another story that Heloise brings up that she wrote about some adventurer named Grimple, who she goes on an adventure with. But in the content of this book, Heloise made it sound like that had not been written yet, but it's on the cover of this book. And so I was so confused as to the order that they came out, that they happen in.
Well, I can't speak to any of that, but there is another Heloise book, or there are two Heloise books, I believe, that are her and Grimple, and not, in fact, the sequel to The Part About the Dragon Was Mostly True. They are not a continuation of some of the events in this book, but those two stories do exist.
Right, and Heloise references them at the end of this book, or she references her story about it, which I assume is Gibson's novel, The Chronicle of Heloise and Grimple.
I don't know about that.
Only clairvoyant. But the tenses used was extremely confusing. It doesn't actually matter. Maybe I was just bringing too much meta into it, but she did it first.
I haven't read them yet, so I can't comment.
Yeah, I have no idea. Anyway, that is neither here nor there, but I was confused. Be confused with me. Before we move on to our spoilery conversation, however, Sarah, why should you read this book?
If you enjoyed Kings of the Wild, you'd probably like this book. If you haven't read Kings of the Wild, but you like D&D or bathroom jokes or hilariously unreliable narrators or Terry Pratchett, you should read this book.
We are using D&D as a catch-all for fantasy RPGs.
Yes.
I don't think you even necessarily have to be familiar with a tabletop RPG, although that's where I recognize a lot of these tropes from. I mean, just even, wow, Warcraft, that's the one I was trying to say. Warhammer has ruined me.
I thought you were going to play it off as WoW being not an exclamation.
Better. But... Oh, can I cut? I'm going to cut all that out and just have me making sense.
You're welcome.
To avoid spoilers for The Part About the Dragon Was Mostly True, skip to 3748.
So, one thing that I wish was developed more in this book, and I hope that will be developed in the sequel, although I did ask Sean when we were getting sequel on Twitter, and he said, there was a pandemic.
Big old question mark.
Yeah, basically. I want Nadi and Heloise to have a chance to develop their relationship, because Nadi, who is the ranger,
yeah, I would say ranger.
She has a crush on Heloise, and it's very cute.
It is. I did not read it that Heloise was interested back in her.
I don't necessarily think that Heloise is interested, but I would like to see that relation. Like, I want to see a development of that relationship, even if it's Nadi actually like saying verbally, "I'm interested in you," and Heloise saying, thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah. I'm more of the orc chieftain kind of gal.
Yes, or the dwarven kind of gal.
Yeah, she's super into dwarves. Also, just I read it as she enjoyed the attention, frankly, and obviously played into it when it benefited her.
Mm-hmm.
But I did not get the impression that she was attracted to women, although maybe she does say dwarves. She doesn't say dwarven men, so Maybe that's me being small-minded.
I didn't get the impression that she was not into women.
Fair enough, yeah.
And even if she's not into naughty, I just think that it was cute.
Yeah.
That crush. And I would like to see more of it.
Or maybe Naughty will get a love interest that reciprocates, and then Heloise will have to deal with not appreciating Naughty when she had her.
Oh, I like that too.
Yeah. We're gonna make you a romance fan. We've brought it up a little bit earlier, but the orcs in this book was probably my favorite part. Where they come across the orc encampment town.
It's basically a town.
Yeah, it's a town. That's one of the first things when they actually get inside. They're like, there's porches with grandmothers. What? And yeah, that idea that these groups of people aren't villains, they're just other groups of people. Like I said earlier, there was a lot of setup for fantasy tropes that I was a little bit hesitant because I didn't know if it was going to go anywhere. And Gibson proved that it was earlier than this moment, but this was where I was just completely engrossed. It was definitely my favorite part. The orcish legal system, and the only celebration that they actually get, despite Heloise's insistence otherwise.
Yeah, the scenes with the orcs were very good. I don't know if I particularly have anything to add on that statement. It was just good. I do like there. So we've mentioned how
I nodded even if I didn't say anything out loud.
I'm pretty sure it's we. We've mentioned how bits of this remind us of Pratchett. And one of the things that particularly stood out as being very similar was some of the, I don't know if I would exactly call it social commentary, but there's a quote about gendered words, which I really appreciated. It is talking about how Borg, who, as I mentioned, was the rock giant, was very good, unexpectedly good at sewing. And
although, a quick comment, the character's expectations were because he only wears a loincloth. So being surprised that rock giants are good at sewing is not rude given those details, I think.
Well, that's true too.
I just wanted to include that. That doesn't have anything to do with the comment you're about to make, but they were justified in being surprised, I think.
Yes. But my comment is not about them being surprised. But so Heloise says, fun fact, it turns out that Borg is at least as good of a seamstress as Madame Mona Lafleur. Seamster? I have no idea what the gender proper way to say that is when the one doing the sewing is a man, or at least a rock giant. Maybe seam giant? It's telling that a word can be so gendered that you don't know what the male equivalent might be.
Tailor is the answer. Sorry, Heloise.
Tailor has really different connotations than seamstress, though.
Am I thinking of the wrong word? No, tailor is just someone who does clothing, who does sewing.
I don't know. So maybe this is me, but when I think of seamstress, I think of not necessarily fancy clothing, more like everyday, regular, ordinary sewing. And
but is that your gendered expectations
it could, I mean,
showing through?
It could be. It certainly could be. But when I think of tailor, I think of like Kingsman suits. So
the definition of tailor is a person whose occupation is making fitted clothes to fit individual customers.
And the definition of seamstress? If they're different, though, why do you need to have a seamstress? Why can't
a woman who sews?
Why can't you just have a tailor? See, a woman who sews is not necessarily a professional.
That's true. A woman who sews, especially one who earns her living by sewing.
Well, okay.
That does include things other than clothes, like blankets and curtains, and I guess furniture would probably be different. Upholstery.
Yeah, furniture is
probably different. But I think we're running into the thing where cooking is a woman's job unless it's paid well, in which case it's always men. That it's the glass elevator situation, right? even though the nursing industry is dominated by women, the men in it still make more than the women in it.
Well, and it's like computer science was developed by women and it became a man's profession.
As soon as something is, the only word I can think of is fancy, but that's really not prestigious.
Yes.
The moment something becomes prestigious, even if the general occupation is considered women's work, the high-powered positions are still held and maintained by men.
Yeah. See, I think that's where I think that tailor is not the right equivalent to seamstress, because tailor implies prestige, rightly or wrongly. I mean,
but I'm wondering if that's a symptom and not the cause.
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah. Chef and chefstress. I'm going to start calling them all chefstresses. All right, we've teased them long enough, Sarah. We must address the puns in the book.
There are some very good puns in this book. I can read more of my favorites. I mean, I feel like this segment is just going to become me reading quotes from the part about the dragon was mostly true.
Okay with that. They're good puns.
They are good puns.
Hey, if anyone made it this far and still hasn't read the book, seriously, don't listen to this part. Go read the book. The puns are better in context, obviously.
They are better in context. Okay, I'm going to read about half a page because you need some of the setup for this pun. But then why call them bogmen? I shrugged. Because people are idiots, and we live in a patriarchal society. It had a penis, interjected Borg. What? Asked Naughty, incredulous. We waited for 2 minutes before Borg spoke again. It flopped around when I pushed it. You pushed his penis? I asked. Geez, buy a bogman dinner first, Borg, or at least a drink. I don't think he did that, said Rummy. I hope he didn't anyway, because Borg didn't ask, and it's not okay to touch a bogman's penis if he doesn't say it's okay. I'm pretty sure it's not okay to touch anyone's penis without consent, I said. Rummy tilted his head to concede the point. I think that's a good general rule, or maybe just a good genital rule.
And it can be both, Rummy.
Yes, I was going to say A, yes, and B, yes.
Gibson does tease us with some sequel content at the end of this book, or should I say Heloise does.
They both do.
They both do.
So at the beginning of the book, one of the reasons why this band of adventurers gets together to face the titular dragon is because they are running from an encounter with a stronger enemy, a wizard, who completely outclasses them. And they've just handed over some, super strong magical item to this wizard. And then they go and deal with this dragon. And we don't find out what happens with the wizard. And that's teased at the very end of this book. And it leaves me with so many more questions and answers.
Well, we better tune in next time.
Yeah. There better be a sequel.
We had one more thing to bring up that I remembered solely because the quote in question is on page 69. One of the things that is introduced early on in this book are the names of the people who live in Skendrick, which is the town
or village.
Or village. It is the location beset upon by this dragon. And all of the characters' names in that place are absolutely ridiculous. And luckily, I was not the only one to notice that. I'll share some of their names here. Yeah. So we have people in this town or village, locale.
And I should note that we are calling it a town or village because there is some dispute among the residents as to whether it should legally be considered a town or a village.
Like the whole first chapter is about whether it's a town or a village. It was a nice little recurring joke. I'm trying to find just some of their names.
Well, there's Goodman Drunkman.
That's a good one.
And Goodman Youngman.
Those are the two best ones, probably. And Alderman.
Yes, and Alderman. And Heloise has a quote, Skendrick is mildly less boring than Borden, which is one of the 5 most boring places I've ever been to. My editor's note is Borden is also a pretty good name for a very boring town. And I've been to a lot of places, I replied, though it's a perfectly valid place to be from. I wasn't seriously-ing your place of origin. I was seriously-ing your ridiculous names.
And that, I think that's a great example of some of the jokes that Gibson plants really early on. And, well, if you know him as a writer, I'm sure you would be more confident that he's going somewhere with it. And, the names are funny enough. They're silly, they're goofy, whatever. But then having it loop back around and be addressed in that way was felt very fulfilling for me as a reader.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I was a little bit of a shithead.
Why were you a little bit of a shithead?
I did look up Minotaurs in the 5th edition Monsters Manual for Dungeons and Dragons. I was curious, right? It's a big deal when they're fighting the Minotaur that he's resistant to fire and weak to ice. That's not a thing in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons.
He's also very flatulent, and that's probably not a thing in the 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons either.
That's true. Right? It didn't bother me while I was reading it, but because there is so much D&D in the book, I had to know. I was curious.
Did you look up earlier editions?
No, I did not. That's a good point. But
because we don't know if it's specifically 5th edition.
That's true. No, Minotaurs are mostly good at mazes.
I mean, that tracks with mythology.
Yes. Anyway, it didn't bother me, but it had me a-thinking. I also did like the beholder in a gown, in a ball gown.
That was a good image. But the Minotaur thing, it's like all of the best games have a little bit of homebrew to them, right?
No, it didn't bother me. I was just curious because a lot of the other stuff I could identify as oh yeah, that's something unique to this book, or oh yeah, that's something pulled from D&D as I know it.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to that and I was like, is that I want to know. I want to know which one it is. That's all. I wanted to know which one it was.
That's fair.
I do acknowledge I was being a little bit of a shithead, though. Once again, we descend. I'm not sure why I chose descend. I do. I do know why I chose descend for this step in our journey on the center to the Discworld. It's because we're going to hell today.
We are going to hell today.
In Discworld, though, specifically.
You mean we're not going to hell every day?
Well, aren't we already there? But, podcast related, we read Eric by Terry Pratchett.
And I want to mention that this is the first Discworld book since we started our journey to the center of the Discworld that is a new read for you.
Yeah, I think I have been honest about this in the past that I haven't actually read all of them.
I'm pretty sure you've mentioned it, yeah.
I've read quite a few. Yeah, I've read most of them. But there are just some weird gaps because I never sat down and was like, I'm going to read all of them. It was always, which books are at Barnes & Noble when I have allowance money because I'm 14 in this story.
You were not like me and went, I'm going to read everything in chronological or publication order.
Well,
which I guess is chronological order for Discworld too.
I am now. Does that count?
You are now.
Yeah, it was fun getting a new story. I mean, new to me.
Yeah, I bet.
It was also a Rincewind book, which that's probably the answer, is I just haven't read many of those.
It's funny because Rincewind is my favorite series of Discworld, personally.
It's been really good so far. Something that I noticed, which is very unique for the Rincewind series of Discworld novels, is that they all are extremely connected. There's a very strong timeline.
You mean unique for Discworld in general, not specific to you're saying that all of the Rincewind books are very closely related in time, not which is unique among the Discworld series, not that that's specific to this particular Rincewind novel, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. For example, you don't really have to read an earlier death novel to read one of the later death novels. There are some similar characters, but they're introduced and then it's fine. You don't have to actually know what happened in a previous book. Whereas, well, if we're cheating and use the first two Discworld novels, they're literally just one book. They got cut in half.
Yeah, that doesn't really count.
Okay. But in this one, there's a footnote on page 12 that just tells you the plot of Sorcery.
It's true that I think that the Rincewind books, more so than any of the other Discworld books, are more chronological. Like I agree with you that they take place one after the other, or more closely one after the other in a way that not many other Discworld books do.
They're not as chronological. They also depend on each other. Like they follow very closely. The consequences of one book follows through into the next one.
Mm-hmm.
This book starts by Rincewind being summoned from the hell dimension that he had found himself trapped in at the end of Sorcery. No, it wasn't
Dungeon Dimensions.
Dungeon Dimension. Okay. It sucked, though. You can agree there.
It did suck. It was not a pleasant place.
Yeah, it was a hell dimension, if not capital H hell. And so that is directly tied to the events in this book.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess, well, I haven't read all of the other ones very recently, so maybe I shouldn't try to recall. There are other series that are more or less related to the previous books within the series, but this one I think stands out for being so interconnected.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think that there are other books and other storylines that do something similar, but there's more of a time gap.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, Weird Sisters and Witches Abroad follow each other chronologically, but there does feel like they're not necessarily immediately one after the other.
And the events of one book aren't like the setup for the events in the second book, are they?
They're not the setup. They are kind of heavily referenced, but it's not quite as much of a setup, no.
Yeah. It's not the direct cause of
it's not the direct cause of the next book. And that is the case for some later Rincewind books too.
Rincewind, man. Rincewind is just self-important. I don't know where I was going with that. It just stands out to me. That's all.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair.
But yeah, a whole footnote that literally says, "See, sorcery." Like, Pratchett, man, what are you doing? Were book sales down? Like,
I mean, he's just, written this as a continuation of Sorcery.
It was fine because we have read Sorcery. And I think you probably could read this even if you hadn't read Sorcery, because, well, there's a footnote that tells you everything that happens in it, first of all. But also, like, you can follow along. It's just with how independent some of the other Discworld books are, it was very interesting.
I feel like Eric is also a little unusual just because it was published, and looking at I'm pulling this from the Wikipedia page. This is not part of, like, I didn't just know this. But
you don't have encyclopedic knowledge of the publishing dates of every Discworld novel? Are you even a real fan?
I'm working on it. I wasn't actually going to talk about the publication dates just yet.
Oh, okay.
That's later on for the conversation.
Sorry.
But I was going to say, like, it was published as a Discworld story in a larger format than the other novels, and it was illustrated.
Oh.
So it has a little bit of a different origin story than any of the other novels, which fits with its kind of different feeling.
It's also extremely short. I thought I had purchased the wrong book. When I basically got like a standard A4 envelope with a pamphlet inside. And I was like, oh no, I got the abridged version. Like, no, it's It's like 150 pages long.
I mean, my copy is 200 pages, but there's the pages are quite widely spaced.
Yeah. But it's very short. And even holding that book up to the other Discworld novels, it's like half the length of Mort, which was a pretty short one too.
Yeah, it's not a very long novel, which is good because I had less time to read it than normal.
I wasn't rushing to finish it for once, but that's because I was 100 pages in and I was like, oh, hey, I'm almost done.
That's kind of a nice feeling.
That's an us problem, though, and not a book problem.
That is an us problem.
No, I really liked it overall. I will say it is directly referencing Faust, which you can tell because on the title page, it says Faust and it's crossed out and says Eric.
Yes. It is a very clear parody.
I am not familiar with the story of Faust. I think we started to watch an adaptation in an airport once.
We did. So we started to watch a stage play put on at the Globe that I have on DVD that features Arthur Darvill as Mephistopheles, which is why we were watching it.
I remember that much.
Yeah, but
I must have fallen asleep or something.
I don't think that we finished it. I saw it. I'm pretty sure that I saw it live, actually. I think that's why I bought the DVD.
Well, falling asleep on you in an airport is as much of Faust as I remember.
Well, now you've read Eric and you don't have to read Faust.
There you go. I would still like to watch it, but I guess I'm saying that I will be leaning on you because does Faust go hang out with Odysseus? I don't think so.
Look, this was like 8 years ago. My memory doesn't go back that far.
Okay. So maybe you also don't know what happens in Faust. One thing that was also kind of fun when we were prepping for this episode, we wrote down quite a few identical notes for this book.
And that's not usual because our notes typically are quite different.
Yeah. But I would say over half of them were firmly overlapping.
Mm-hmm. Referencing the same scene or the same concept.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's just fun. A little bit of a meta conversation there, but that's okay.
Fiction fans trivia.
Which Terry Pratchett book did they agree on the most?
I feel like that wouldn't necessarily be Eric. It's just that we had notes in agreement.
Yeah, okay. So when we were planning out what to talk about, I pulled out a pun that I did not get at all. And I was going to ask you to explain it to me. But as I was typing it out, I got it. So no one gets to make fun of me for not getting this pun, but I'm still going to share that it befuddled me for a couple hours.
You know what I just realized is I can't use your page numbers.
Oh, yeah, because our prints are different.
Yeah, normally I can use your page numbers and actually look at the quote you're talking about, and I can't.
Oh, welcome to the struggle of buying non-bookstore novels for English major classes. Because the teacher had all the page numbers for one version, and obviously you go to the used bookstore to get Frankenstein for $1. But then you can never find the part they're talking about.
I tried to avoid English classes, so.
Wow. Good thing that wasn't my goal, because I failed spectacularly.
Yep.
Eric gave a sigh of lung. Oh boy. I should have measured my whiskey. Eric gave a sigh of long-suffering patience. Minerals, he said. Ores, you know. Rincewind colored. I don't think a lad your age should be thinking of... I spent so much time trying to figure out the dirty pun in the word minerals. Like, mine, her alls. Yeah, I could not figure it out for the life of me.
I feel like sometimes you just have to actually like speak a sentence or be typing it out and like thinking it in your head.
Well, I realized then, okay, so this must be an accent thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then I started trying to say minerals with a obscene Cockney accent in my head. You're like, oi, minerals, pip pip, governor. Did not get any closer. Did not help at all. Turns out it was oars the whole time. The later pun of horology, the study of time, or the study of whores, depending on which side of the pun you're on. I got that immediately. Anyway, whoops.
You got it eventually, and that's all that matters.
I got to the right place. I figured it out.
You did figure it out eventually. Something that I think is interesting, and listeners can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like I don't hear much talk about Eric as a Discworld novel, and yet it has some of the most recognizable quotes, or at least to me, the most recognizable quotes. One of them, for example, is on what I would say is page 153. It's probably not your 153.
I don't think I have a 153.
Thus, it's probably not your page 153.
No. That page does not exist. Okay, sorry. Continue.
Multiple exclamation marks, he went on, shaking his head, are a sure sign of a diseased mind. There's also a quote that I thought was from this book about hell, the road to hell being paved with frozen salesmen, but that's actually Good Omens and not this book.
But there was so much overlap between this book and Good Omens.
Yeah, there was. I'm going to start that over. Yeah, there was. And I wonder how much of that is because they were written at roughly the same times. I mean, obviously, I don't know how long the writing process for either books was.
I would argue they were published around the same time.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm was going to say. Like, we know that Eric was published in 1990, although the internet didn't tell me exactly when. And Good Omens was published in May of 1990. And I am making the assumption, which could be incorrect, that means that they were written at roughly the same times.
I feel like the foreword of Good Omens implies that it was a pretty long process.
But there was still probably some overlap between the writing time of Good Omens and the writing time of Eric.
Absolutely, yes. I would just say that I think if we were looking at influences, I would say it feels like Good Omens influenced Eric, just based on my understanding of the timelines.
Yes, and I would not disagree with you there. Like, I think that you're right. It felt like Good Omens influenced Eric rather than the other way around. This also could just be a factor of we've read Good Omens more.
Yeah, well, I certainly have.
But no, I think you're right.
It does have a road to hell is paved with good intentions joke, though.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it does have, I think that the joke in Good Omens about the frozen salesman is better.
It's certainly more original.
It is more original, but there is a similar joke at the very end of this book. You're right. There's also another joke where they say that hell has, in Eric, it says that hell has all the best tunes. And in Good Omens, there's a quote, it said that the devil has all the best tunes. This is broadly true, but heaven has the best choreographers. And like those are basically, at least the first half of that sentence is basically word for word the same.
Those are definitely echoing each other.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. You have one more comparison here that I think you should bring up.
I was going to bring it up, actually. And that's, I think, that the theme of what hell needed feels kind of like a reprise of the theme of humanity in Good Omens, in that there's a lot of talk of hell is not as good at coming up with horrific ideas as humans are in both books. And like demons are not the ghastly ones. It's all of the worst ideas come from the mind of humans.
Absolutely. And we also get, I mean, the mastermind behind that in both books definitely has some similarities as well. Or those, I'm sorry, there are different masterminds, but because they are the ones who came up with that concept, it's hard to not draw similarities between them.
Yeah, it feels kind of like the devil in Eric is a less compassionate version of Crowley.
Well, Crowley is not the big man on campus in Good Omens.
He's not the evil one in Good Omens. Also, side note, because I'm used to Supernatural, and supernatural and good omens pronounce that name two different ways. I can never remember whether Crowley is the good omens pronunciation or the supernatural pronunciation, and whether Crowley is the other one. I think Crowley is good omens and Crowley is supernatural.
Oh, I always pronounce it like Alistair Crowley.
See,
which is not related to either of them.
well, no, it's related to both of them.
Sure. That was a dude, though. Like Alistair Crowley was a dude.
Yeah, I know that, but both characters are named after him.
Okay.
Or like are referencing him. And I don't know which pronunciation goes with which fandom.
Me neither. Sorry. So. I can't help.
I think it's Crowley.
Well, when he's first introduced, he's Crawley. Like creepy Crawley, like a little snake.
This is very true. But all of that to say that if I mispronounce it, it's because I'm thinking of the wrong fandom.
Well, I thought we decided we weren't going to get into pronunciation discussions this episode and just do whatever the fuck we wanted.
we decided that for Heloise.
We decided that for Heloise.
we didn't discuss that in any other context, but yes.
But he is the mastermind behind the strategy in Good Omens, even though he's not in charge of hell, all capital letters, in charge of hell, which is who in Eric comes up with that.
Yeah. And Crowley or Crowley.
Sea Dog.
I don't think I can refer to him as a Sea Dog.
It does circumvent the issue, though, doesn't it?
You're right. It does. It does. Anyway, I don't even remember where I was going with this.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't have interrupted.
My brain is too fried by Sea Dog. Anyway, the King of Hell is like a less human or less compassionate version of Sea Dog.
See, it was a good idea.
I can't say that with a straight face.
Okay, I have one more comment about this book before we start getting into the spoiler conversation.
What's your comment?
We all know I have a huge soft spot for the character Death, and he has some really excellent scenes in this book. He's not a main character. He just sort of shows up because how can you have conflict without Death? You know, he's always around a little bit. But there is one scene with him and the Demon King, or the King of Hell, or whatever his title is, Astafugel.
By the end, he is the Supreme President.
And that's a spoiler.
I don't think that's really a spoiler.
All right. Then it's not a spoiler. But Astafugel, or however you pronounce his name, I'm not going to apologize for that because it's stupid on purpose.
This is true.
The two of them have a really wonderful scene, a little over the halfway point. I would say like 2/3 into the book. And I won't get into the content of it because I do think that would be a spoiler, but holy shit, Death's dialogue is top notch in that moment.
Death is very good in this. I mean, Death is very good in most books, but Death is very good in this book.
He is always very good. Yeah, that moment for me was just like, yes, this is everything I ever want out of one of these. All right, when should you read this book? Because we've decided for Discworld, we're not going to say, should you read this book?
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. When should you read this book? It should not be the first Discworld book that you pick up.
No.
Definitely not. I think that if you're enjoying the Rincewind books, if you started reading them chronologically and you've read Sorcery and you want to read more Discworlds, I think this should be the next Discworld book that you pick up if you are enjoying that. If you are on the fence about Discworld or on the fence about Rincewind, I would maybe say skip this and come back.
Yeah, I don't think this is as, I'm going to use the word slapstick. That's not exactly the right phrase, but Rincewind tends to get into hijinks, and the hijinks in this book were very different from the previous ones, I feel.
Yeah, it feels a little more muted in some respects.
Which is why I originally said slapstick, which was not quite right, but I wasn't totally wrong either.
Mm-hmm.
So, very good book. Also, so short. Just read it. It'll take you less than an afternoon.
Yeah, I mean it's something that you can easily read in a couple of hours. Like it's not going to take you very long.
And it does have that fun theme of being very strongly referential to a piece of literature, which a good number of other Discworld books do. Not all of them, of course, but that is, I would say, one flavor of Discworld. And so if you are considering that, totally worth checking out. Although, who really knows what happens in Faust? So maybe not useful.
Well, 8 years ago I did, or however many years ago.
A certain number of years, a village number of years ago.
Yes.
To avoid spoilers for Eric, skip to 1:14:56.
So I didn't realize this because I didn't actually write it down, but I also have a note about how I really love Laviolus.
Yeah, I loved Laviolus or Odysseus, depending on how technical you want to get.
I mean, depending on whether you're referring to him by his our world name or his Discworld name.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. The main thrust of this book is Eric and Rincewind sort of running around through history, and they hit a couple of points, and one of which is absolutely the Iliad. And poor Odysseus is Laviolus, and he is very tired and put upon, which kind of tracks.
That definitely tracks. Also, Rincewind's ancestor, Laviolus, means rinser of winds.
I loved that. Loved that so much.
It's very good. Something that I noted as being particularly pertinent, just because we had read the part about the dragon was mostly true for this episode as well, is that there's a little bit of that kind of like expectation versus reality framing in Eric, like there is in the part about the dragon. It comes out in a little bit of a different form, but like Eric, he has 3 wishes, and he's getting Rincewind because he thinks Rincewind is a demon. He's getting Rincewind to fulfill these wishes, and one of them is that he wants to see or meet the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Troy.
I believe he wants to possess the most beautiful woman in the world.
Well, okay,
and he doesn't specifically say Helen of Troy. That's just how the wish is fulfilled.
Right. That's no. I'm saying that is Helen of Troy, or in the story, Eleanor of Sort,
which, as I think was cut, but we mentioned earlier between ourselves, Helen of Troy is one of the only connections with Faust that we could identify based on summaries online.
Yes, but especially with regards to Eleanor and, you know, the battle for Troy or Sort, there's this big disconnect between what the story is and what Eric thinks is the case versus like the actuality, which is kind of what we get with Heloise and the story that she tells, you know, her bardic tale versus the story that she tells in the part about the dragon was mostly true, the actual events.
Poor Eleanor of Sort, that having some little shit roll up and go, she's not that pretty.
Yeah, I mean, Eric is kind of a little shit. He's also 13.
I realized we did not summarize at all, which, oh well.
We did not summarize. Now. Well, I was going to say it's not too late. You could still summarize.
Eric summons a demon. Rincewind is trying to escape a different dimension, and so he takes the opportunity.
I don't think he realized he takes the opportunity.
No, he's just trying to get out and does it, but Eric helped on accident. Eric is also 13 and trying to summon a demon to get him a bang made. Not in so many words, but that's what it was.
That's basically what it was.
And the wishes obviously backfire, because that's how it goes. Mm-hmm. We later find out that a different demon was fulfilling the quote unquote wishes to distract the demon king, which was a very good. That twist at the end with the coup was excellent. So they are accidentally being brought around throughout time into different situations, one of which being the Iliad, or finding Eleanor of Sort because Eric wished for the most beautiful woman. Or, if you read the back of my book, to have a stylin' hot babe. Yep.
That's what my book says too. All he wants is to fulfill 3 little wishes: to live forever, to be master of the universe, and to have a stylin' hot babe.
That doesn't actually, that fits pretty well. That fits pretty well with Eric. What does bother me is the very end of the summary. There's only one thing Eric wishes now: that he'd never been born. No.
That's not quite accurate.
That never happens.
That does not happen.
That categorically does not happen.
Nope, that does not happen.
That's just a lie. One of my absolute favorite moments in this book was Rincewind using social engineering to get through hell. And it is very explicitly draws the connection between the hierarchies of hell and the hierarchies of the Unseen University, which just sort of cements my idea that Pratchett is extremely snarky towards the higher education system in Britain, and he's going to make fun of academia everywhere he can, including comparing it to literal hell.
Is this when they're at, because of course
I know my page number doesn't help.
Because we have different editions, your page number doesn't help. Is this when they're at the doorway to hell?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Not for nothing had Rincewind survived for years in the paranoid complexities of Unseen University. He felt almost at home. His reflexes operated with incredible precision. "You mean you weren't told?" he said to the person guarding the door, trying to prevent them from getting in. It was hard to see if Flogga's expression changed, if only because it was hard to know which part of it was expression. But it definitely projected a familiar air of sudden and resentful uncertainty. "Told what?" it said. Rincewind looked at Eric. "You'd think they'd tell people, wouldn't you?" "Tell them what?" said Eric, clutching his ankle. "That's modern management for you," said Rincewind, his face radiating angry concern. "They go ahead and make all these changes, all these new arrangements, and do they consult the very people who form the backbone?" "Exoskeleton," corrected the demon. "Or other calcareous and chitinous structure of the organization," Rincewind finished smoothly. He waited expectantly for what he knew would have to come. "Not them," said Flogga. "Too busy sticking up notices, they are." "I think it's pretty disgusting," said Rincewind. Anyway, they get along great and it's wonderful.
They do. Also, what's wonderful is I was able to find that quote.
Just that moment of he's been in enough university settings that he can manipulate a demon.
One of the things that I really enjoy about Rincewind is how he uses his wits to get out of situations.
Like Odysseus.
Like Odysseus, yeah, or
Yes.
Laviolus. And this is really no exception to that.
Do we address Quetzalcoatl?
And that whole segment?
Yeah. Or
that whole segment.
Overcoat, which, like, come on. You're better than that. Yeah, that. One of the places they visit is not the Aztec Empire, but it was clearly riffing off of it, and it just wasn't funny.
It's again, it's one of those things where it feels like he's laughing with racism instead of laughing at racism.
Well, that was the thing. All of the jokes were, their words sound like other words, herder. Which, like, that's no.
Yeah.
So you have to get through that whole section, and it's just boring because none of the jokes are actually funny.
Yeah, like it was fine.
A couple of them landed. There were a couple of good, like, general religion riffs, which I'm always down for. But all of the cultural ones were just ugh.
Yeah. Yeah, it was not his strongest piece of humor. And it wasn't, I mean, it wasn't as offensive as some of the other like racist bits that do come up, but it also
It didn't make me clutch my pearls or anything. It was just all of the quote unquote jokes were stupid and bad because they relied so heavily on that. And it was like, there's not actually any joke there.
Yeah, it's like Terry Pratchett, you're better than this.
He usually is.
To be fair, this was written or published in 1990, but still, like, even in 1990, it probably wasn't that funny.
Instead of Quetzalcoatl, it's Quetz overcoat. And that's it. That's the whole joke. There's nothing there. There's nothing.
Yeah. It's not really great.
Not. I wonder if I'm especially hard on it because we did read Servant of the Underworld by Aliette de Bodard earlier this year. And that is a fantasy novel completely within the ancient Mexican setting, which is my attempt to pronounce Mexico with the correct accent. And I'm sure I fucked that up, but that's what I meant. And like, so that was a fantasy novel with all of these really, like, this rich pantheon and all of these gods, and me trying my damnedest to pronounce these words correctly, even in my own head. And then Pratchett rolls in, granted 30 years earlier, with, it sounds like a different word.
Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely one of the weakest points of the book. It wasn't great. I think it deserves to be called out as being not great.
There were moments they get teleported to this place because one of Eric's wishes was to be the master, like to rule all kingdoms.
Something, I mean, he basically wanted to rule the world and, get all of the tribute associated with ruling the world and all of the praise.
So these people have a prediction. That's not the right word. A prophecy. These people have a prophecy that a king will come and he'll be the ruler of the universe, and they want to torture him because the universe isn't great, and that's apparently his fault if he's the ruler of it. And that part was pretty funny.
That bit I did like.
And so he shows up and they're giving him a bunch of money and he's so happy. And Rincewind obviously realizes something's not right. But Eric assumes they're worshiping him and everything, of course, is right. And so that dynamic and that moment was funny. I did laugh at those points. So it wasn't completely hopeless.
Well, because that bit is not relying on racist stereotypes so much, We're laughing at a 13-year-old for assuming these random strangers are going to worship him for absolutely no reason. Yeah, I can laugh at that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not like this whole section of the book was without redemption. There were just long stretches that I literally fell asleep while reading. Now, it was after lunch, so that's not entirely on the book, but did actually happen. Would you like to end this conversation with another quote from this book that we really liked?
So this quote is from the Arch-Chancellor of Unseen University, who still is not Arch-Chancellor Ridcully. We have not gotten to Ridcully yet, but we're getting there. Slowly but surely. Anyway, it is the Arch-Chancellor's point of view. His head ached. He felt it was several weeks past his bedtime. And that's the extent of the quote that I wanted to read.
That's it.
That's the quote. That's it. That's the quote. Because I, too, always feel like it is several weeks past my bedtime.
You're talking to the woman who just admitted to napping after lunch, so...
Oh man, my lunch break is as often as not spent doing a nap, taking a nap.
Sometimes you just got to catch up on bedtime.
Yeah.
And the Arch-Chancellor of the Unseen University understands that.
He's also probably, 80 years older than we are, but
if not more. This is something that I find happens more often with, I don't want to say amateur authors, but I don't know how else to say fan fiction.
You could just say fan fiction.
It mostly happens. I mostly notice it with fan fiction, but it does absolutely happen in traditionally published books. So you aren't getting away from this complaint today, real authors. A minute is a really long time. I feel like authors use the word minute when they actually want the word moment.
Mm-hmm.
Because one moment is, yeah, who knows, whatever. That's however long it takes to be correct.
It's nebulous.
Yeah.
It is a nebulous definition.
A minute is a concrete unit of time, and saying that something happens for a minute is almost always way too long.
What I really have trouble with is when fan fiction authors, or real authors, but I see this more in fan fiction, not real authors, published authors.
I said that earlier as a joke. I would like it to be known that was a joke.
I do mean published authors.
You mean traditionally published authors?
No, I mean
published authors. Okay.
I mean published. Well, I'm taking published authors to mean
fan fiction versus original works. It's fine. But
yeah.
We're never gonna get the verbiage right.
Yeah. That's not the point of this pet peeve.
Also, this is a pet peeve in case you couldn't tell.
but I do like people, particularly fan fiction authors, will say like a conversation took 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and they'll give us the text of the conversation, right? But it's something that will only take maybe, 30 seconds if you're saying it out loud with someone. Because I don't think that people realize just how long a minute actually is in a dialogue.
Well, just in general, a minute is a long time. This did come up in the part about the dragon was mostly true by Sean Gibson. However, I'm like 99% sure he was doing it on purpose.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that Sean was using a minute as just an exaggeration because Heloise is prone to those.
Because there are times when they're waiting for, I forgot his name.
Borg.
Was Borg? Okay. Borg.
My notes say Borg anyway.
Borg takes a very long time to react to things. And it's so often in that novel, it will be described that everyone is waiting for 5 minutes for him to respond. And oh my God, 5 minutes is way too long. But to your point, Heloise is a very unreliable narrator and prone to exaggeration. So it's okay. Like that, it became part of the joke. But a lot of authors do it sincerely, and that bugs the shit out of me. Just to make a point, I am now going to stop talking for 1 minute.
Are you actually going to include a minute of silence in this episode? This is long and not funny. Don't make me talk. Oh God. I don't like this. I don't like this at all. This is really mean of you to just spring this on me. Now I have a minute or 30 seconds left or whatever now to fill. And it's like, it's like that British show where you have to talk about a topic for 1 minute with no hesitation, deviation, or repetition. And my God, that's hard. I'm not used to just talking.
You did it though. That was it. That was a whole minute.
Yeah, but there was repetition and deviation and hesitation there.
Okay, yes. I meant you survived. But that's one. Okay. This also comes up a lot in pornography, where someone will orgasm for 10 minutes long or whatever. And it's like, no.
Yeah, that's a long orgasm.
That is incorrect to the point of unacceptable levels.
Yeah, that's just kind of ridiculous.
No one moans for a whole minute, okay? It doesn't happen. Just say moment.
Just say moment.
It's right there. You could even say 5 moments, a handful of moments, whatever. But it's not going to make me go, well, now I'm going to count out 60 seconds in my head and see if this makes sense. It never does. It never makes sense.
Yeah.
Don't use minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really argue there.
Unless there's a good reason. I can't come up with any off the top of my head. But
well, the good reason is when you have an unreliable narrator like Heloise, who is very clearly exaggerating.
Sure, yes. Or I don't know, if you're giving us that 80s montage of someone getting strong and it's like, and then they held a plank for 5 minutes. That is concrete information that's actually useful. I don't know why you would be describing it that precisely, but I think that's what it is. Using the word minute is very precise, whereas moment gives everyone some wiggle room. It gives us the suspension of disbelief, and we can just assign whatever value makes sense to us in our head instead of making me start, like, literally break out the stopwatch and go, how incorrect is this? Let's find out.
Yeah, that's fair.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We're on Twitter and Instagram at fictionfanspod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review on Apple Podcasts and follow us wherever your podcasts live.
Thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated. Bye.
Bye.